Good morning.
Good morning.
I hope you had offerings last night, and I'm very pleased to be opening the second day of our Evolutionary Astrology Conference. And I'd just like to know, before I start this morning's lecture, which is on gender, I would like to know how many people here are new to the evolutionary astrology material. Can I just have a show of hands? Okay, so we've got a significant amount. In terms of looking at the chart, my subject matter for today is looking at gender assignment issues. And I have some very interesting examples that I want to put up for us to look at as a group today. The principles of gender assignment are a very large component of evolutionary astrology, as we are all accessing or processing our anima, animus, our feminine energy and our masculine energy. As we look at the chart, we can see how readily we can access our inner male or inner female. And we do have specific signatures in the chart that talk about gender identification. We all come into the physical and biological conditions that best support our evolutionary journey, and that also includes our sexuality as well too. The idea of coming in as masculine or feminine from lifetime to lifetime. We switch genders. This is not so unique. We do this as our evolutionary requirements dictate in any given lifetime. But we also have some very significant signatures in the chart that show us that these issues of gender assignment have become issues that we are confronting in the current life. And so they become key issues in terms of our psychological and emotional makeup. We have some key significators that will show us about recent gender orientation. When we look at the nodal axis, that's the nodes of the moon, which are commonly used in astrology. The north and south nodes of the moon located in the signs of Cancer or Capricorn, or in the 4th or 10th house. Also Pluto in the 4th or 10th house are going to indicate a recent gender switch and a recent issue regarding this gender switching. We're also looking at the phasal relationships, and phasal relationships are very important in being able to assess the dynamics of any chart. They're not unique to evolutionary astrology in particular, but they are very widely used in the type of astrology that we practice here. When we also are looking at phasal relationships, if we assess the moon and Saturn, we can see how this component is being developed. These are the rulers of the signs of Cancer and Capricorn. Venus and Mars in their phasal relationship within a chart as well too. This is the relationship dynamic, the intimate relationship dynamic. And when we look at the relationship between Mars and Venus in a chart, we see how we are relating both to intimate partners and also how we are relating to ourselves on an intimate level. So contained within all of these symbols here, we can start to formulate a story. And my best way to show this is I have some chart examples that I want to take you through in order to demonstrate the components of working through your own issues with anima, animus. And of course, when we do chart examples, it's always interesting when we use dynamic charts. And so the charts that I have for you today are very dynamic and not necessarily common experiences. But first of all, I want to show you this chart as a way of describing how the movement of a chart is shown. And everything in the chart is moving continually. This is the moment of your birth, but the relationship of all these planets show how far along you have come in your development. So first of all, in terms of talking about this component of recent gender switching, I've just mentioned that if we see the nodal axis in the 4th and 10th house, then we have a recent gender switch. And indeed, this chart has a nodal axis in the 4th and 10th houses in the signs of Virgo and Pisces. And always remember, too, when you're looking at symbols in a chart, that we can look at the qualities of those. Virgo, Pisces are mutable signs, and so we have transitional archetypes being represented here. We also see that Pluto is located in the 10th house as well, too. And every one of the cardinal houses, 1, 4, 7, and 10, indicate that there are new journeys beginning. Okay. So we have here, when we look at this chart, we have 2 signatures that are readily available to us to show us that there has been a recent gender switch. And if we then take this a step further and look at the phasal relationship, we're looking at Pluto in the 10th house, and we look at its relationship to the nodal axis. The nodes travel in reverse motion. So we can see here that the south node is past past planet Pluto in a new phase setup here. Okay, so we have several signatures here that are giving us that new evolutionary impulse. Okay, with Pluto in the 10th house in the sign of Virgo, and we have Virgo on the midheaven, we have a breakdown of external structure. And in this case, I'm talking about a breakdown of a physical environment, and in the talk today, I'm talking about sexuality here. So what we have here is the externalized role as having some kind of breakdown being shown by the fact that Pluto is in the sign of Virgo retrograde, and that we have retrograde on that 10th house. When we see Virgo on the 10th house, we have some level of anxiety, and we have some kind of crises orientation in that structure of consciousness. The 10th house represents the structure of consciousness. All right. So we've already got a wounding issue that is being oriented to within this component here. And if we go down to the ruler of that Virgo archetype, we'll see we have Mercury in the sign of Aquarius in the 3rd house. So we have here a component of social alienation. We have a 10th house theme of persecution and crises. We have an exaggeration of that theme being with Pluto being in the 10th house in retrograde, a breakdown of structure. Okay. And the sign of Aquarius brings up trauma issues. It's one of our key concepts for this, a sense of disconnectedness. And indeed, this person has felt a sense of alienation. Sorry, I forgot to figure out, 34 years old, born, for the sake of the tape, February 28th, 1970. This individual was born as a male, All right. And throughout, of course, we see the component with Pluto in Virgo retrograde in the 10th house, a sense of a persecution complex. This person had a hard time in childhood, was not recognized by his parents, had a sense of feeling alienated in his own skin, seemed to be off in a world of his own, really didn't fit in anywhere, very awkward, very strange almost sense about him. We also see Scorpio on the ascendant, and Scorpio reiterates that theme, pulls the Pluto position up there in the 10th house. Scorpio has a component of betrayal, abandonment, and loss issues in it. So we have as a primary motivating factor, which is seen by the ascendant here, and we have the moon in Scorpio. We have a sense here of fear that is exaggerated within the component of this chart. It's also very interesting, too, that we see that the moon is the reflected image, and the moon represents the personal image, our personal take on how we feel about ourselves. So this relates to how this person feels inwardly, and being that this is right on the surface, we have a readily available component here of emotions that are very raw and on the surface. We also have Neptune very close to that moon, which indicates here a sense of loss of self, okay, sense of loss of boundaries, okay, a sense of vulnerability. The Scorpio archetype always has a sense of vulnerability. Scorpios don't like exposure. And so we see with this ascendant and moon and Neptune sitting here in the first house, and once again relating to the ruler of that ascendant being in the 10th house, we have an awful lot of exposure for this individual. So we have someone here who doesn't feel comfortable in his own body. Right. Also, too, when we look at the 4th house imagery here, we see the sun is conjunct the north node. And so the 4th node relates to the sign of, the 4th house relates to the archetype of Cancer. And once again, we have the self-image. And we have a very strong component in that 4th house. We have Sun, North Node, Ceres, and Venus, all in the sign of Pisces. So we have a very big content in that 4th house of loss of self and a sense of loss of distinction. We also have with this, the Sun conjunct the North Node here, a sense of a glorification concept here on a Piscean theme. Anywhere that the sun is a maximization influence here. And so we have Venus, which is the inner resonance. Venus and the 2nd house and Taurian archetype relate to how we are inwardly relating to ourselves, what the inner vibration is, what our inherent sexuality is. And so here we have the self-image, and we have Venus in the sign of Pisces, which is a feminine archetype here. So we have the self-image, the self-reflective image being seen by the Venus placement in this chart. And also we have Ceres there, which is a feminine influence as well, too, in the sign of Pisces. So we have an inward sense of accessing the feminine within this personality. Right? We see Chiron in the 5th house, in the sign of Aries, which is a wounding issue to the masculine and a wounding issue to the self-assertion. The Chiron point is a hypersensitive point. The 5th house is a maximization influence. So whatever is being seen in the 5th house is maximized. And we have a hypersensitive point here. We have Chiron being maximized. And in this we have a wounding to the self-assertion principle. We have a wounding to new beginnings. We have a sense of loss of self. The Chiron symbol contains an intensification of the previous sign placement, and the previous sign to this Aries Chiron is a Piscean archetype, which is a dissolving influence or a loss influence. So we see here that there is a hypersensitivity to the masculine energy. And if we look here also too in terms of phasal relationships, we see that we have Pluto and Mars. Pluto is the bottom line soul perspective. It is our bottom line psychological, emotional perspective and where we start in this lifetime based on our past lifetime dynamics. It's the unconscious portion of our evolutionary journey, and Mars represents the conscious portion of that, the instinctual, conscious registering of the soul's evolutionary intent for growth in this lifetime. And we see that we have Mars in the sign of Aries, again in the 5th house. We have a maximization theme. This Mars and Pluto placement sits at what we call a primary lifetime. It's 135 degrees apart, a sesquiquadrate. I can never pronounce that right. And so this symbol here, that 135 degree point, is a crises-orienting point once again here of attempting to realign to the central core evolutionary purpose. So bringing the individual back to the original intent for evolutionary development in this lifetime. So as seen by the Pluto in the 10th house in retrograde and in Virgo. So we have a mutational aspect going on with the Pluto signature here. We see that Mars has come into the sign of Aries, which is a masculine energy form. And we see in the 135 degree aspect, we have a component of resentment. And indeed, this individual never felt comfortable in his body, never felt, was very angry at coming into the masculine form. We have a component here with the ascendant being in Scorpio of fear. There's a lot of fear base that's being shown in the chart. Saturn in the 6th house in Taurus, once again here, a structure of consciousness that has arrived at a critical mass point at a state of inertia, which is another key word for Taurus, bringing us back down to the ruler, which is Venus in Pisces in the 4th house. Am I going too fast for anyone in terms? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, yes, Mark.
You're saying it's a sesquiquadrate between Pluto and Mars. Isn't that an inconjunct phase? A second inconjunct, 200 degrees?
Yes, I'm sorry, 150 degrees.
Virgo archetype, Pluto in South Node.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, absolutely. Once again, a primary lifetime. And
It also applies,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
well, it emphasizes it even more in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. You know, the sense of having been born into the wrong body, for sure. Absolutely. We see here, once again, I mean, the themes simply repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. In any case, this person has recently undergone a gender switch, and I'd like to just let me make sure that I've said everything that I need to see. Do you see how this is working? Yes.
When you say gender switch, are you talking about an operation, or are you talking about a switch from lifetime to lifetime?
I'm talking about an operation in this lifetime, which took place in 2002.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on the angular relationship between Mars and Pluto? I hear what it is in this one, but I just mean generally. You mean whether it's in an opening phase or a closing phase?
Oh, okay. Yes, it's in a full phase.
I don't mean specifically this one, but just what the general principle is. In other words, if it's in an opening phase, how does that distinguish it than if it's in a closing phase? In other words, past 180 degrees.
Okay. What this means is having come through from 0 to 180 degrees of building up of a process and coming at the maximization point at 180 degrees, then moving from 180 degrees back down to 0 or all the way to 360 here is now orienting to a new process. So we have the development in the lower hemisphere, and then leaving that, maximizing at 180 degrees, and then leaving that, closing that whole formula here. So we see in this case here that this is moved past the 180 degree point, right?
So I don't know, I'm just asking, if it's past the 180 degrees, could one assume that it's the finishing of many lifetimes of business sort of thing in terms of the soul's purpose, the conscious purpose of soul expression?
Oh, okay. When we look at the phasal relationship between Mars and Pluto, we have 8 primary lives, which are seen by if we follow the lunation phase and phases of the moon, then those are the 8 phases, the folds of development. We have primary lives and we have subsidiary lives. And when we're at the evolutionary thresholds of those phases, we are at a primary life, and that is seen by the Mars-Pluto phase. If your Mars-Pluto is not in that phase, then you are in what we call a subsidiary life. And so this means that you are not maximizing on moving through a threshold. Any one of the evolutionary gates, it's a critical mass time for transformation and for moving through one archetype into another, one evolutionary principle into another energy pattern. And you can stay at the primary lives or at the subsidiary lives as many times or as many lifetimes as it takes you to accomplish your path. We see the development of critical mass in terms of exactitude of aspects. The tighter the aspect, the more that is arrived at a critical mass point, which means that there is an opportunity to move that energy forward and to orient to a new evolutionary patterning. All right. Sorry. Okay. All right. I wanted to point out as well too the Venus-Mars phase in this chart as well too, and we see that that is also balsamic, which means that Venus is coming up to closure in the near future in terms of this evolutionary wheel. In terms of looking at the phasal relationships, we use the slower moving point as a stationary point. I believe that Kim Marie's pre-conference workshop had a lot of information for anyone who's interested in more work on phases. If you didn't attend that, then please buy the video. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so we see then the relationship of this individual to themselves on an intimate level is also arriving at a closure phase. Okay, so we can see that how that's working on. Let me just put up the next chart for you to take a look at. Yes? I'm sorry. Yes?
Question. In this case, it looks like the individual is in the process of spiritually going from masculine to feminine, switching gender, of course, with that, the sun on the north node. But is there ever a case where, for example, the sun's on the south node, might we have someone who's, in this case, switching from female to male, but with the sun on the south node, is having a gender switch, having an operation to hold on to what they were? Do you understand? Like, even though they're trying to move, the soul is trying to move them from masculine to feminine, they've been born in a male body, but still felt so identified with the feminine that they switched, had an operation to switch back.
To switch themselves back.
It's possible? Like, I mean, it could be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Rose, just a quick one. Going with yesterday's talk about Lilith, Black Lilith, conjunct in Leo, conjunct Vesta to do with sexuality. This is like an actualization of, finding courage
Right, exactly.
to deal with this sexual. It's not more and more of a theme.
Mm-hmm. And the sun on that north node as well too. Our north nodes are sometimes hard for us to access. I describe this like a perspective drawing. You have two people that are exactly the same height, but if you do a perspective drawing, that one over there looks like a dot. Okay, it's the same thing with your north and south node. They're equal, and they operate equally. But it's like that perspective drawing. It's kind of over there in the distance, and it's sometimes hard for you to get at. But look at this with the sun on that north node. This is drawing attention to that north node, drawing attention to the evolutionary forward, drawing attention to the feminine within. So this individual is identifying. It's like holding the flashlight up and saying, "Hey, look inside there, see who I am," right? And then wanting to become this, right? So this is quite interesting. This was the date of the operation, and I must say that this individual, he's got the moon at 29 degrees of Aquarius there. That was kind of interesting because this person was very objective about going through this whole thing. This person is so, I have to say that this person is so afraid of themselves, or was so afraid of themselves in the masculine body, that at the age of 34, this person is still a virgin. He had had one girlfriend when he was about 17 and kind of didn't go anywhere. And he's remained in a very isolated capacity. And coming into this, this is the progressed chart for the time. Sorry, I just have to pull out my own chart here. For the surgery here, and we see this moon in Aquarius here, which is giving that ability to disconnect and to move forward in this. We have the Pluto position has moved into the 9th house, and the nodes as well too, which is a mutational category being shown here. It's quite interesting. The sun is in Aries, but it's orienting to a new archetype. So I just want to find my charts here for just a moment. Yes.
I just want to be clear, is this a chart just for the surgery, or is this his progression?
That's his progress chart for the time of the surgery. And sorry, I just have to fumbling with paper here. Sorry, here we go. Okay, good. right, here. So here we have the natal chart with the progressed chart on the outside. And my little scribbles there are the transits that are also happening for that day. In the transits, Mars at 27 Libra was opposing Mars. There's a trine in the chart here someplace. Oh, we have the transiting Moon at 11 degrees, right on the nodal axis for the day. Saturn in the sign of Gemini in the 8th house. 8th house rules surgery. We have Venus and Mars and Saturn listed in the 6th house. We have Mercury on Mars. Sorry, let me just find my notes here. It was interesting in the. I think I might move on because I have two other examples that I wanted to show you here. But it was interesting. One of the comments that this individual made, and also another chart that I'm going to put up in a moment about the hormones warring with each other just before the operation, and how worried they were that they weren't going to make it to the operation. It was very, very interesting. Anyway, this with the Piscean component in this individual's 4th house, she has become, she's embodied that feminine side and is really looking forward to. She's got a very large sense of romanticism about her. She is looking forward to finding that man in, that knight in shining white armor and so on. Unfortunately, she's not doing very well. This operation took place in November of 2002, and she's not doing well on a physical level, and it may require more surgery. The Mars-Pluto natal phase as well, too, being that it's being shown in the chart here, is suggesting that although there has been a gender switch, and I suggest this for all transgender people, is that because you do this gender switch doesn't necessarily make the road any easier. So we have a whole new set of crises dynamics to work through, and certainly this individual has their work cut out for them. Let me just see if I have that. Yeah, okay. I'm going to just move ahead if I can. Are there any questions on this? Okay. Okay. Is Adina here this morning? Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that Saturn and the Moon were also implicated. Can you explain that a little more?
When you find the Moon, balsamic Saturn, which means when the Moon is coming up to closure on Saturn, that is going to indicate that a gender switch is imminent. If you have Moon and Saturn in a new phase, it's going to suggest that you have recently done a gender switch. If you are looking at Moon and Saturn in opposition, then you'll be at the halfway point in that developmental process. If you, Saturn and the Moon, when the Moon,
The first phase you're about to.
A new phase.
balsamic? The balsamic phase when the moon is coming to closure on Saturn. It indicates that an entire cycle is coming to closure.
Thank you.
Okay. Also, too, when you find either Saturn or the moon on the nodes, this will indicate a recent gender switching issue as well, too. So when, just to recap, when I look at a chart, I rely very heavily on the phases in order to do my assessment. So the first thing that I do is I look at the Mars-Pluto phase to see what kind of energy pattern the soul is working with to accomplish its evolutionary journey. And then I'm going to look at the phasal relationships of everything else in the chart and see how that stacks up. The rulers of the nodes. I'm going to look at the Mars-Venus relationship patterning. I'll look at the Saturn-Moon relationship patterning. And this, if you just really sit down with a pen and paper and write all of this down, it will basically fill in the story for you. You know, and that way you can, it's really a very facilitating way of getting into the chart and working with it.
What are your orbs for a planet on the node?
I'm discretionary. It really depends, you know, and sometimes I use tight orbs, and sometimes I use very wide ones. It simply depends. Okay. This is another individual who has done an operation and had a gender switch. And that surgery took place in December of 2000. This person, for the sake of the tape, May 28th, 1954, 2:26 a.m. in Alliance, Ohio. And this chart was supplied to me by Adina, who's, I think, our next speaker today. So this individual was born as a male. Once again, when we look at the components of the chart and look at the gender switching issue here, we see that the nodal axis is once again in the 4th and 10th house. We also see that Mars is up there in the 10th house along with the North Node. Again, the cardinal houses suggest that a new evolutionary impulse is taking place. This chart has the Mars-Pluto phase at 135, which is our sequiquadrate. I got my charts mixed up is what I did. Okay. So, and Mars is in retrograde here, which when Mars is in retrograde, it's trying to counteract what has come before. And when we have Sagittarius influence here, Sagittarius is always an influence of escape or wanting to be free. And so here we have on the midheaven a structure of consciousness that is looking to free the self of conditioning patterns of past lifetimes. And of course we have the Capricorn component here being shown with the North Node and Mars, indicating here a desire to free self from the limiting roles that this individual has played in past lifetimes. Again, we would suggest that this is a primary lifetime based on that Mars-Pluto phase. Okay. And Pluto in the 6th house and in the sign of Leo is an orientation to crises. The soul chooses to evolve and learn through the component of crises. And we bring that Leo back to the Sun in Gemini. in the 3rd house is crises over dualities. Okay, so we see how that works. The identity crises, the duality of relating to self, is both masculine and feminine. We see again a strong component in the 4th house, and we have that Cancer archetype, which is the feminine. We have Venus, the inward resonance of the way we relate to self, also in the sign of Cancer. So we have this inward, and again here we see another maximization influence. We have Jupiter beside that Venus. Jupiter enlarges whatever it touches, and so again we have the component of enlarging the feminine within. We see that we have the moon in the sign of Aries in the 1st house, and the moon in Aries in the 1st house is indicating here a desire for newness and a desire to discover something new about self. We have moon squaring the nodal axis, and when we have a planet that squares the nodal axis, we have what we call a skipped step. Okay. A skipped step means
What indicates a skip step?
when a planet is squaring the nodal axis, whatever planet squares the nodal axis is indicating a skip step. What that means is a flip-flopping back and forth between whatever the component is indicated by the south node and whatever is indicated with the north node, and that's looking at the planetary rulers and the dynamics of aspects to all of those signatures there, indicates that there has not been enough accessing, that there has been some crisis point, some intensification, some critical mass that has created an avoidance and created an individual to veer off the course. And so as the skip step comes back, it's something that must be confronted. Seeing that we have the nodal axis in the 4th and 10th house, and we have the moon, which is a self-image, being located in Aries in the 1st house, which is about beginnings here, we would suggest that the gender switching is relatively new, and this may be one of the issues around the accessing of the gender assignment issues for this individual. We see the ascendant or rising sign as Pisces, and so this would also indicate Pisces is about dissolving of an identity, but it's also about concealment as well too. So we can suggest maybe that this individual came in hiding the feminine, okay, and came in with the Mars in Capricorn. We have a suppression issue going on here with that 10th house being seen, and we have a suppression of anger, and whatever is suppressed is distorted. All right. So the issues here in terms of the anger accessing, we go from the Mars in Capricorn to its ruler, which is Saturn in Scorpio in the 8th house. And we see that the 8th house here, which also has a Libra on that house cusp, indicates an imbalance in past lifetimes. Saturn in Scorpio, again, will be a fear of sexuality for one, which would be a good reason to hide, but it would show violations of a sexual nature in past lifetimes, and the extremity caused by the Libra archetype also being part of that 8th house signature. The Mars in retrograde in the 10th house is showing up as a retrograde because the soul is desiring to counteract what has come before.
So you said that Mars in Capricorn is a repression of the Mars. Mars is traditionally considered exalted in Capricorn.
Capricorn itself is a suppressed,
Just because it's ruled by Saturn.
just because it's ruled by Saturn. Yeah.
So anything
Yeah.
that's in there.
Yeah. Okay. And with Mars is instinctual energy, and when it appears retrograde, it is meant to give some level of consciousness, some additional consciousness to that instinctual level, so that we have some stop, look, and listen going on before taking action. Yes?
Is this individual born male and transgender into female?
Yes.
And I'm curious, with the Mars on the North Node, retrograde, was the individual female before and is trying to switch into male, but has switched back in the current lifetime because they're having to counteract something before? Or is this soul wanting to switch permanently?
This soul has come into a masculine body in this lifetime as a way of counteracting a sense of powerlessness of the feminine. The feminine has been damaged in past lifetimes. And based on the 10th house archetype here and the conditioning factors that are seen by the 10th house, and also the wounding issue, by the way, of Chiron and Capricorn as well, too, which is a persecution, social alienation aspect as well, too. What we have here is a soul that has been conditioned in terms of the gender distinctions, the role identifications here. So the feminine has been wounded in past lifetimes. So to come into a masculine form would indicate some past life conditioning or memory of power. We have, again, Pluto in the 6th house, which is a loss of power. And so this soul chose to come into the masculine form because that is what the soul remembered based on conditioning factors of being empowering. Having come into this this gender, it has discovered, or he has discovered over time, that that the feminine has been the underlying theme, and that by coming into the masculine form, that it hasn't solved the problem. Okay, so the gender switch is to go back to reclaim that feminine, which is the origin issue here of being feminine. Okay, so it's to return to the true self. Okay.
Oh, that's the thing that skips that moon.
Right, exactly. So this is quite complex because what the individual has found is that he, although apparently he is very strong, very dynamic, has been very powerful as a male, obviously there has been some lack. And now moving into the feminine in order to re-empower self and to reclaim and rebalance. In actuality, this transgender has become bisexual, or sorry, a gay, and that would be seen by the sun in Gemini. So this person has switched genders, but is now oriented to relationships with women, is now a woman, and is also relating to having relationships with women. Okay, yes. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, 10 minutes left. Okay. It's a huge topic. Yes, hi.
Maybe you could speak a little bit on 4th, 10th house nodal accesses that are not oriented towards a physical transgendering switch, but merely dealing with that issue of aligning the anima and animus in the current lifetime from whatever gender they're in.
Okay, yes, and I happen to have my nodal axis in Cancer Capricorn, and I'm not planning on doing an operation in the near future. And I do feel very feminine, thank you very much, so, I'm going to stay there. And I also happen to have Moon and Saturn in a balsamic relationship, and so in the near future I will become a man, but I will probably stay in this lifetime in this gender for a few more lifetimes before I switch back into my masculine form, which is my original form. I'm an Aries sun, and that's what I resonate with. That's, in terms of my own my own way of being, I find myself in a very masculine role. I've had to take on, when I was married to a very masculine man, and we played out these roles. He was very much, the macho man, and I was very much the weak feminine. But in actuality, in our accessing, being that he was Cancer as well too, he was extremely feminine and I was extremely masculine in that relationship. So it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic. When you do the gender switch, if it's a recent switch, you tend to embrace the new gender that you're in totality. This chart example, this individual was described as being very masculine, and even now with this gender switch is still being described as extremely masculine. We have Mars in Aries, Moon in Aries in the first house, so we've still got that component going on. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So you will find, I find when I deal with my clients, the gender switching component comes up often. And when I describe this to my clients, you can physically see their shoulders drop. When you describe, when you just give them the idea of, the fact that they have recently done a gender switch, they kind of go like, wow, okay, that explains everything, thank you. And people immediately grasp that. And it is so very helpful to the client in helping them to understand themselves. It's simply amazing. It really is quite a gift to be able to see this in a chart. What we're all looking to do is to rebalance the masculine and feminine within. So, we're all looking to have an equal amount of both operative and active at any given point in time, right? I'm sorry, was there a question at the back of the room, Catherine?
I wanted to know how you knew that you were originally male.
Because the second house is your inherent orientation to yourself, what you inwardly resonate with. In my second house, I happen to have my sun in Aries. So if you take a look at your second house, it's going to describe your inherent sexuality. I'll be talking a little bit about this tomorrow when I do the lecture on the projected self in the relationship. In terms of looking at sexuality in the chart, the first house is the instinctual sexual impulse, and the second house is the inner inherent sexuality or sexual resonance, right? And of course we have a Scorpio component of the 8th house.
Is
Yes.
evolutionary astrology always using the porphyry houses?
We do, and it's choice, really. You can use any house system that you like. The porphyry house system, for those of you who are questioning what house system to use, we work with rulers. And when you look at the rulers of the house cusps, that will tell you everything. So if you draw your chart up in a few different houses and look at it, you can see what you resonate with and use that. In doing this work in evolutionary astrology, you're not forced to use any house system. You can use whatever tools you wish. But I have found that porphyry does work. I'm running out of time. I just want to put up this other chart for you to take a look at. This is another client of mine who volunteered to have her chart being shown. Just find my notes here. Okay. Now, this person was born male. Just find my chart here. And here, we do not see the nodal axis in the 4th and 10th house, nor do we see the nodal axis in Cancer or Capricorn, right? But we do see Saturn on the south node and the moon on the north node. And remember I said that both of those have to do with gender switching. We have the nodal axis in Virgo Pisces, which is mutational. Okay, so it's quite interesting there. We have Venus in the, look at the second house here, that inner resonance. We have Libra there, which is an inherently feminine archetype. Here we have Venus in Libra. We have a Sun in Libra as well too. Okay, we have Moon in Pisces as well too, which is dissolving of a self-image. Once again in a mutational phase. We have Mars in the sign of Sagittarius right beside Chiron as well too. They're almost on top of one another. And once again, Mars in the sign of Sagittarius, the instinct to free oneself up. Okay. This, yes?
Could you briefly say which signs are feminine and which are masculine?
If you go through the natural houses from Aries through, it's masculine, feminine, all the way around. Okay? All right. Just quickly, because I know that we don't have very much time, this person's sexual history is pretty dynamic. His first sexual experience was paid sex at the age of 11. His father was exceptionally abusive, used to bring him to the steam baths, where he said that he felt very uncomfortable. He said he never, although his first sexual experience was with a man, he said that he never felt that he was gay. And he continued, he had his first sexual experience with a woman at the age of 17. But being the age bracket that he was in, of course, we have the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era, and this person got very heavily involved in drugs and so on. The story is pretty dynamic. At the age of 16, was kicked out of the house and went to live with a couple. And during a drug evening, he was raped by both the male and the female. And it continues that this person, we have that moon in the sixth house, seemed to be a magnet, was continually raped in various situations throughout the early years. This person actually became a prostitute. It's quite interesting to see that we have in this chart, we have Jupiter trining the Sun, and it's quite interesting because in the first example, the gender switch, this person has had nothing but trouble with the operation, is still suffering a couple of years later. This person, 3 months in recovery, no sweat. You know, it was a great thing to do. She went back into the sex trade once she did the gender switch, as she said, to try out the toys. She went in before she did the transition when she was doing hormones, and so she was both male and female. She was in high demand, and we have that, quite, Aquarius in the sixth house, and it's really quite a story. In any case, this person has transgendered, but is now gay, and so despite the fact that and in the and in her 20s, or in his 20s, he married, and so he was married. Did the gender switch in 1989, and decided that the preference was still for women. Incredibly lonely soul, incredibly lonely, a real warrior. It's a very impressive chart. I'm sorry I don't have time left to go into very much of it, but you can see that despite the fact that we do not have the gender signatures in this chart, we have someone who has done a gender switch in this lifetime, as being seen by the nodal axis in a transitional immutable signs, and with the Saturn and the moon on that nodal axis. Also, too, by the way, the nodal axis in the 1st and 7th house, anything in the 1st and 7th house will be immediate issues to resolve. I'm sorry I'm out of time. Thank you very much.